Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. It's Warren Hewitt here, yes, and I'm sitting in Spitfire Studio, the new one. And I have been asked this question several hundred times. What is your new console? Tell us a little bit more about your new studio. So I thought I would take a little bit of time to explain to you what we have here. And what is it? It is an Audient ASP4816. It is the Heritage Edition, and I'll show you why it's called that in a couple of minutes. But I'm very, very excited. It is a console that I can use for mixing in a hybrid fashion, because that's how I like to mix, with the detailed stuff inside of my DAW and then global stuff on the console. And also, of course, it's full of 16 beautiful mic pre's, so I can track full bands, etc. So I put a little mix up on the console. It's something really simple that was recorded at Sunset Sound. Barely doing any work in the box. I think some time adjustment kind of stuff, but it's a good illustration to show you what I think is so wonderful about this console. EQ-wise, it's really, really straightforward. You've got high frequency and low frequency there. You've got a 10K shelf, and if you hit the air button, it's 18K. For those of you that have hearing like a dog, or you're super young and you still hear up to 18K. Regardless, being an air band, it means that if you want to boost it quite dramatically, it will get some of the high frequencies a lot earlier and just bring them up gently. It's really tasty on vocals. In fact, we'll try it on vocals in a second. The low frequency is 50 Hertz when it's up and 100 Hertz when it's depressed, which is basically like kick drum up, bass guitar down. What I loved about using my knee for years, before I even got the SSL, was a similar kind of thing. You had fixed EQ points and you just built it a little bit like a puzzle on the low end. So for me, it's like 50 Hertz kick drum, 100 Hertz bass guitar, bada boom, bada bing. We have the mids here, which is between 450 and 20K. So it passes all the way around the high frequency. So if you want to get in there and double boost, which quite often happens for me in vocals, I'm really trying to create some air, you can. You can also boost at like the 10K area broadly and then get a little bit more detailed and pull an unwanted frequency out. But increasingly, like many of us, I'm mixing hybrid. So I am sitting there, doing some of the real detail work in my DAW and using the console, the analog EQs for more global stuff, and frankly, more musical sounding things. Now, the low mids here, I'm using on this kick drum, for instance, here for cutting some of that low mid. Take out the EQ. Still a really good sounding kick. Just a little bit more, maybe a bit more snap. There you go. So you can see why I love having consoles. You can just get in there and do some really, really tasty stuff really quite simply. So up here, if you go right to the top, you can see there's some routing. So what I've actually chosen to do was to take the drums and route them through a bus here. Now, subgroup, bus, whatever you want to call it. Everybody calls it something differently. But that means that if I wanted to insert some stuff on these particular channels, or if I want to cut these channels quickly, I can. You can, of course, just send it straight to mix down here, which if you go to the bass guitar, which I've got on 7, the piano 9 and 10, the vocal on 11, and then the background's on 15, 16. That's what I've done. I've sent them straight to the mix, straight to the master bus. Now on the master bus is a really beautiful sounding, quite frankly, probably SSL style compressor. I mean, it's got all of everything I'm used to on an SSL. I've got a 2-to-1, a 4-to-1, and a 10-to-1. At the moment, I've only got it on 2-to-1. I'm using the auto release, which is what I've always loved. I got my threshold set pretty high, so I'm only getting a 2 to 3 maximum dB, maybe 1 to 2 dB worth of gain reduction. No real makeup on there. But the most important thing is I've got this button, Bass Expand, in. Now, what that really is a high pass. It's allowing the low end to go through. If I take it off, well, you can hear.
I would lie in bed at night and dream of you tearing me apart. I never thought that I would be caught by.
But also what's interesting is I've got all of the Heritage Edition stuff turned on. Now this is also adds a schnizzle ton. So even if I leave this Bass Expand button in, which is allowing the low end to breathe, I've still got a transformer drive going here. I've got a low thump, or low bump as they call it, going there, and a high frequency lift. So if I take all three of those things off,
I was sick.
I mean, it still sounds great, but let's put the low bump on.
I would lie in bed at night and dream of you.
It's a nice little thump. I do like it with the transformer on as well, so let's put that on.
I never thought that I would be caught by love so helplessly again.
And frankly, the high lift is also awesome. So all the time, yes, you guessed it, all three of these buttons are on and the bass expander's in, and I'm mixing through it. And it's giving me everything that I love about the analog world. I mean, that's the sound of the Sunset Sound drums to me. As you can see over here, I'm looping a section. I have time adjuster on the snare, taking the top and bottom snare and putting it in phase with the overheads, but that is it. Everything you're hearing is the original multi-tracks, which of course you'll be able to download below, and the sound of the console. That is it. Sound of the console, original recording. So let's take off the bass expand, let's take off all the Heritage Edition stuff, and I'll try and get it all in and all off at the same time. So all on. Off. On. Everybody loves the word analog, but yes, it really is giving us the things that we love about a console. It's coming back out of the DAW specifically, and I can have an insert point in that. Now, of course, I have a mic line selection here, which if I'm coming in a line input like a keyboard or something, I can select there, and that also has an insert. And of course, its own individual gain, its polarity switch. So what's interesting here is we have a meter flip. So if I hit this, now the DAW is coming out the mic line, and the mic line is going to the DAW, which would be really useful, of course, if I'm tracking live drums. You know, I've got small fader going to, say, the short fader, as they call it here, going to a rough mix or something, and then the large fader is going to DAW or vice versa. So, you know, whatever I want to do more detail in, which would probably be on the recording side, I go to the large meter there. So you can flip it. Make perfect sense, I hope. Okay, next up, there's a phase meter, 48 volt, of course, phantom on and off, and a high pass, which I readily employ while recording. Because you high pass stuff where you don't need that excessive low end, it makes the mix really super quick. You're printing it without all that excessive low end you don't need. You pull it up on fader and you'll almost be there. So we already checked out the routing, and then apart from that, we've got, oh, you can shift this from 9 to 16. So it's 1 to 8 on every single one, but without the need of multiple amounts of routing buttons, you can flip it so it goes 9 to 16 rather than 1 to 8. Which would be really useful if you wanted, fader to do that, or you wanted direct out. So maybe there's some kind of system where you're recording separately another, 8 channels. You can set it up like that permanently and just flip it in and out. There is the pan control, which we don't need on because we're on mono channel, obviously, at the moment. And then there is the long fader or the short fader selection. Obviously, we've got this coming out long fader down here, but now it would go to short fader with it up. So long fader and short fader. The same can be said, by the way, I didn't cover this with the EQs. I can also send the general EQ, for instance, just the top and bottom. I can send that, see the selection here for in, and turning the high frequency and low frequency controls off, on and off. I can also send them to short fader as well. And the same thing with the mid control here. I can send that to short fader. So I could have a generic kind of top and bottom boost on something coming back on a rough mix, and then some detailed work going on a print. It's a nice feature. I think most of the time I'm going to be printing how I want it to be, and then when I return it, want to mix it the way I want it to be. But I can see an instance of maybe where you've got a lot of virtual instruments coming back, and you've got them coming back on short fader, and you might want to do some quick boom and fizz to them, or vice versa, you know, do some detailed work. I totally get it, and it's a great feature to be able to separate the EQs onto different faders, whether it's playback or recording. And then auxiliaries, there's a schnizzle tongue. There's a lot of auxiliaries. You've got 6, which, you know, when I was a kid, that was like, oh my God, you've got 6 auxiliaries in your concert, you can have all these multiple effects. It seems quite comical now in the world of DAWs where you can open up like, 50 reverbs, but it is nice. And of course, they can all be selected to short fader or pre and post. So they're post on the way up, meaning whatever they come off of the last thing in the signal chain, the small fader or the large fader. But you can also send them pre, which is really nice on a mix, because let's just say I took a lead vocal or something like that, and I faded it down. If I'm sending it pre-fade, the vocal could fade down, but its reverb could still carry on. In fact, I could send it higher up there. I love those kinds of, fun things that you can do on mixers. Of course, you can draw them in on DAWs. But there's nothing better for me than having a tactile ability to actually move stuff around and make it work like that. Really, really gorgeous. So that's the same for all 6. They all come in pairs, short fader or long fader selection, and pre and post send. And then, of course, we've got 2 ways of setting up Q mixes, meaning headphone mixes, which, of course, I can send either one to short fader. So one could go to short fader or one could go to long fader. So that's kind of nice as well. You've got pre or post sends as well. So I could set up a different mix than the one that's coming off the faders. Typically, you would give them the same as you're hearing, but you might, of course, on a lead vocal, which we have coming out on 13, for instance, I might go to select it and have, the lead vocal come out pre-fade, meaning I can then give the singer a schnizzle tongue more volume in their headphones than I am hearing here, which is bleeding useful, quite frankly. So I could set the whole mix up to mirror what I'm doing here, but give them extra control. So I can sit there and turn them up without ruining what I'm hearing. Because I want to hear a vocal fairly loud, but I don't want to hear it so it's the only thing I hear and not understand how it relates to the mix. And I don't know about you guys and girls, but I've had so many situations where I put on a singer's headphones after I've been tracking, and it's pure feedback because they've been listening so loud. I try to put them on my head and it's feeding back until it's actually on my head. So it's nice to be able to have separate control of certain instruments. As a guitar player, personally, I like to be in the mix. I find if I'm sitting too loud, I can't dig in and I don't enjoy it. I like to be slightly mixed under. So maybe, in the control room, they might want me in the right place in the mix, but I want to be tucked down a bit. So again, that's when you would select it so that you could have individual control over it, what's going to their headphone mixes. Well, here we've got an interesting thing. I can actually select the long fader as the source and have it go to the short fader. 99% of the time, I am not going to do that whatsoever, but you can. I can also set, obviously, the short fader to go to the mix. If I'm setting a rough mix and I want to come out direct out of the channel and just go straight from the long fader into my DAW and then return on my short fader and have that go to the mix. The great thing about analog is you're not dealing with lots and lots of latency issues. So you can do all kinds of silliness. You can send out from auxiliaries and go to, external stuff and bring it back in, and you're not going to be dealing with latency. I remember Jim Scott saying that to me years ago. He's like, how come I can take my Neve console and send out to 55 different compressors and EQs and whatever, have it come back and there's 0 latency, but I try and do that in my DAW and everything is out of time. Yes, digital, you've got some catching up to do there. That is one of the things that's beautiful about analog. So we've pretty much covered it. I mean, obviously we can solo everything. We can solo the short fader here. We can solo the long fader there. If we move over to the solo section here, you've got the ability to solo in place. What that means is if I pan my instrument to the left, I can solo, and I've got reverb going to the right. With a solo in place done, if I solo the instrument, everything associated with it will appear in the right place. If I don't have that on, which is fine and often quite something I like to do, if I want to solo, say, one background, which is panned to the left, if I solo that without that on, it will just come down the middle, which is not a problem if I really want to focus on it. But I do like being able to solo in place because I like to hear where the panning is. And if I have to adjust that lightly and I've got 3 instruments, I'm trying to make it work together, I'll hit solo in place and then figure out in my panning what's going wrong with them all soloed together in place. Ergonomically, it's well designed because the EQs are actually easier to reach. So I can sit here and do this, then this. So, which is a nice little touch. So instead of having all the auxiliaries down here and the EQs all the way up there, I've actually got everything just a little bit closer and easier to use. And it's it's a large format, small console. It's a large format console, meaning, it's not just like, one PreSonus fader. It is actually a console, but it's just the right kind of footprint. And we had Stephen Slate in here the other day, and he really liked the spacing and was talking about it for the Raven, about getting the spacing just right so people could operate. And I think that that's something they really thought about. It's nice to have things really compact, and there was a real big movement from that in the late 90s. I'm sure those of you old enough to remember will remember how it used to get like so many things all packed together like this. But this just feels right for mixing. Really nicely laid out. On the short fader, of course, solo mode, like I said, and then a cut. So if that's where we're setting up a rough mix, that's great that we can do that. We've got long fader controls here, similar to the short fader with the pan, and the mix control sending directly to mix, which of course would be great because I could come back on short fader and some stuff, maybe have some effects or whatever, and flip that to the mix and also have the long fader come off the channel. Like anything, when you take a console like this with a lot of Q sends, with a lot of auxiliary sends, with short faders and long faders, you're not just restricted to 16 channels. You could go nuts on this. You could really bring in tons and tons of different things, which of course, is reflected up here, because here we have 4 stereo bus inputs. 4, which can be selected to go to buses here. So maybe I'm printing on a mix, a stereo drums, but I'm also sending out to hardware reverb. I could have the hardware reverb coming up here and have it coming back down this as well. I can also send it to foldback. So I could have a reverb that's being generated from the lead vocal on 13, for instance, coming out of 1, and then having it come back so it goes to the cues, and maybe I don't have to hear it. But quite often I make this a separate thing for a singer, or quite frankly, I mix using multiple effects coming back through here. I mean, I still have lexicons. I still, of course, have beautiful Eventide, H3000 I love, the H9000, all of these great effects that are never going to go out of fashion, that just sound phenomenal, that I can have coming back on here. And also, frankly, the great thing about having a console is it becomes your template for mixing. You can do lots of crazy detailed stuff in here, but then you can do some really great global stuff and always have your effects coming back where they're going to be. It becomes your template. You start going, well, I'm going to sum, my mix to 16 faders and maybe bring some other stuff down, auxiliaries, or whatever you want to do, and then have all your effects being sent out, for hardware. It's just gorgeous. And then of course for tracking, you can insert your compression the way you want it to be, and of course mixing, insert it there. It just gives you so much more flexibility, and it's frankly, I love it. I love being able to reach over and turn things up or down. It's really quite wonderful. Now, if we quickly jump down here for the live room, that's basically, I can send mixes back into the live room. This is wonderful for playback, so musicians don't have to leave the live room if you want. It's also wonderful, of course, when you're doing things like background vocals, and you've got like 10 people and you're trying to get them in a room and you don't have the ability to get a massive headphone mix going, orchestral work. Back in the olden days, they would have it playing back in there, play along with it, and then all of the singers or the musicians, when they would leave the room, they'd play it back again, record it, and then flip the polarity and take the music out of it. It's also great for just playing back the tracks. If the musicians don't want to come running in and you just want to get to the point where you're playing them 2 bars, maybe they'll just want to sit there and hear it through speakers. But the number one reason why I like a live room with speakers in it, got my own reverb, I've got my free reverb, I've got my own room. I can go, here's the drums in that room. What happens if I put the acoustic guitar in that room as well? Boom, play it out through there, my room mics are up, and suddenly I've got my acoustic guitar, which I close mic somewhere else, or somebody sent me, and I've got the room. When I had my big studio with my massive live room, people would send me recordings of drums that just had no, I hate this word, but I'm going to use it, vibe. And I would set up speakers in the middle of the room, mic up my room like I would with any other drum kit, and then just play the drums back through it and then fold it in. And it suddenly started to feel like a live drum kit in a real room. So that is a really fun thing to have. So it's great for playing back mixes, using gang vocals and orchestral stuff, if that's for people that don't like wearing headphones. And of course, it's great for creating your own reverb and many other things. So you've got all kinds of selections there. You've got different speakers that you can set up. You've got different cue mixes that you can set up so you could play back quickly what the headphone mix was. You've got a left and right selection, so that's awesome. You've got level controls there. And then, of course, you've got the foldback situation here. So again, just loads and loads of opportunities. Now, if we go to the control room, we've got our mix, we've got external 1, external 2, DAW. So I could have just a DAW only mix coming up to listen to. I could have external 1, could be your iPhone, your Android, whatever it is, you know, whatever the plug is, whatever this week they are making us buy, but that can be permanently set up. So you just go external 1, plug in the phone, off you go. And trust me, that happens about 100 times a day. External 2 could be whatever you want. Again, these could be hardwired to other systems as well. The DAW, as I was saying earlier, could be how you just have your DAW coming back. Then, of course, you have speaker selections, of which all of them have trims. So I can have my main, which is coming up here, my main volume, but I could have 3 alternate sets of speakers, all with their own trim. And you're like, why would you want that, Warren? Well, have you ever tried volume matching 3 sets of speakers? It's a pain in the butt. So your mains and then 3 others. And I do it. I love multiple sets of speakers. I like checking it in different environments. And I can have, you know, some minis, some Auratones, got the big Wayne Scanlons. Obviously, we're big fans of the Genelecs. They're what's been sticking at the moment. Christian Cole has been in here recently working. And these were the ones he chose out of our massive selection of speakers. So big ups for Genelecs. We got the 1032s, of course. The other Genelecs, we've got the Focal, Trio 11s, all of these incredible speakers. So if we do choose to have 2 or 3 pairs in here, we can volume match them. So if we're using them to check mixes on other speakers, we can get them all balanced the same, which might sound really stupid, but I have been on a lot of consoles that have no independent control of volume, all of them. So I have to sit there and do this and have them all marked off. So when I'm checking mixes, I'm doing this. So I'm pressing the all thing and then doing this. And that's really stupid and very, very annoying. So to have independent control is really, really great. We've of course got a mono switch, which is great for checking phase. So for instance, if we go to our drum room mics here, which has also got overheads and stuff in. Let's go to mono. So as you can hear, that's a really useful thing to have when checking things like overheads, anything stereo, just to make sure there's no massive phase cancellation. Now, don't get me wrong. Any of you who've ever recorded will know a pair of microphones anywhere in the room is always going to cause some kind of cancellation, unless you've got exact, you know, like a Lewitt LCT 640 TS, the one that's the capsules like this. Unless you've got something like that, there's always going to be some discrepancies. The point is the discrepancy something that's good, creates a smidgen of artificial wideness, or is it something that just completely cancels all the low end? So a mono button is really useful. Then, of course, we have the ability to cut either the left or right speaker. There's an overall cut just to kill everything. And then dim, and dim is your friend, because when you're mixing, and I like to mix loud for a couple of minutes. These guys were in here earlier. I pull this track up, loud, 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 quiet, loud, 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 quiet. And the dim is my friend, because if I have to focus on something and listen to it for like 10 minutes straight, I better be in dim. If I've got to edit something, I better be in dim. And I love having the ability to just cut that volume while working on detail stuff and not just blast my ears out, because loud is great for enjoyment. We all know that. We love our music loud, but when we're working on something for extreme amounts of time, we don't want to be listening that loud. And I like having the ability to listen and then like this. Cut, I can talk over it, and then it's a nice place to go. Quite often on consoles, I will mark where the optimum level is for enjoyment and sounds flat to me, and mark it off, and then make sure that I'm not cranking it up louder. If I am, I should have been using the dim more often. That's just me. Okay, so we have the solo control here. Again, like I said, solo in place, a great thing. Of course, I've got after fade or pre-fade listen here. So this is an interesting feature, which I didn't even know about. It's called solo in front. Now, what it allows me to do, it's set to 100% at the moment. So if I solo something, all I hear is the vocal. The more I bring it into the mix, the more it allows the mix to come up underneath. So if you're just trying to bring a vocal louder, but not completely kill all of the music, you can set it closer to the mix. So just to reiterate, full solo, mutes everything, all I hear is the lead vocal. If I bring that control and move it towards the mix, it will be lead vocal, band coming up. And it helps me zero in on something, but also never lose context, which I think is a very, very powerful tool. Of course, I've got my master bus trims up here, all 16. They're all defaulted to 0. And of course, they have a detent, so you can make sure they're all on 0 at any time. I've got a auxiliary masters here, so the overall send. So if you're getting your auxiliaries up here and you're pushing them, you're starting to add a bit off of every single channel and you've got your balance just right, but it's overloading what you're going to, you can trim it back here and still keep the balance rather than sitting there and trying to rebalance. There's nothing worse, and I'm sure we've all been this way, when you're sitting there readjusting multiple inputs, wishing you had a master. Well, here you do. You have a master. You can also solo and hear what you're sending to that reverb unit or whatever it might be. So that's quite a nifty little thing. So you can link this to these two auxiliaries, 1 and 2 up here, which is quite interesting, I think, because I might want to send something, double send it. So I might want to send it to auxiliary 1 and 2 as well as 3 and 4. So I like that idea. Oscillator down below is what you'd expect. You're going to play, a 1K test tone. So you might say, what's good about that? Well, it's really good for buses or stereo channels where I want the instrument to be exactly even. So I can send my 1K test tone and, patch it back in through a channel or pair of channels in this instance and just balance them so they are both reading the same. And of course, it's just great to have an oscillator on board as well to test pieces of equipment. Make sure they're working. We did a speaker shootout in here, a massive speaker shootout where we did like 8 pairs of speakers. And the thing we had to do was make sure they were all playing back at the same level, or else you wouldn't know the differences between the speakers. It might just be the volume. And of course, you have that awkward thing where you're turning up, turning down, turning up, turning down. We could set them all evenly from here. Oscillator, of course, can go to the mix or it can go to a bus. You've got frequency selection. You've got 40 hertz, 1K, 10K, 15K on off here. And last but no means least is the bus compressor, which we talked about briefly. It's an SSL style bus compressor. I typically use it on auto when it comes to the release time. It's got the bass expand that we talked about earlier, which is just lets the low end breathe. It's fantastic. Talkback is we got slate bus to outputs, so we can just send that to basically all the bus outputs. So if we've set up headphone mixes through that, it will go to that. We can send it to a stereo loudspeaker if it's going out there. Quite often you do both. So for the guy or girl that's taken off their headphones and is plugging something in and you're talking to them, it's coming out the speakers as well as their headphones. Nice touch. Absolutely superb. A great console, all the metering up here. And the overall left and right meter there, where of course you can see below it the compression that's going on, which of course is linked to our bus compressor. So beautiful console. If you ever get a chance to try one, I highly recommend it. They are definitely not cheap, but for this kind of quality, remember this is a British designed and British built console, they are very affordable in that world. They're very, very competitively priced. So if you are in the market for a console where you want both for tracking and mixing, highly recommend this beautiful console, the ASP4816 Heritage Edition. So I hope you enjoyed that. Of course, there will be a link down below for anybody who is interested in more about this lovely console. Thanks ever so much for watching, and we'll speak to you all again very soon. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, ciao, goodbye.